If you use Stripe payment links and want to create these automatically, or if you accept credit cards but don't have a good way to account for processing fees, then check out this video. There are many use cases for this process, and the one I'm going to dive into is creating a Stripe payment link, including the processing fee, and adding it to your invoice. Check it out. If you use Stripe payment links and want to create these automatically, or if you accept credit cards but don't have a good way to account for processing fees, then you're going to want to check out this video. There's many different use cases for this process, but the one I'm going to dive into is creating a Stripe payment link, including the processing fee, and adding it to your invoice all automatically. Check this out. Welcome back to the channel. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Zach Stevenson. I'm a business process and no-code consultant. If you need help streamlining or automating any of your business processes, you can visit our website, interdevsolutions.com, or you can click the link in the description below to book a free consult. As mentioned, I will be using Stripe to create payment links, but I will be using QuickBooks as my invoicing software. This can be done with probably any invoicing software that has a public API available or that works with Make.com. Make.com is the software I'm going to use to connect these different APIs, and whatever CRM you use or database you use to track your invoices and your payment data will work. I'm going to use SmartSuite. So again, as long as any of these softwares can connect with Make.com or have a public API, process should be very similar. For me, I'm building my CRM with SmartSuite, using QuickBooks for my invoices, and using Make.com. Let's get started with SmartSuite. This is where we are going to start with the CRM or our invoicing information. I already have a system set up here. So if you do not have a SmartSuite solution and you do not have a CRM or somewhere where you're storing this data already and you want to get started, SmartSuite is a great option. There's a link in the description below to get signed up. And if you go to the customers tab here, I have it very simple, but I have my first name, last name, company. I have an address field, an email address field. This is a linked record field that's linking to the invoices. And I have a QuickBooks or QBO customer ID. You will see how this is used shortly, but we will need this field to efficiently create invoices within our system. Over to the Invoices tab. This one's a little more in depth, and I will walk through each field. And while I walk through each field, I will just add a new record. So the invoice ID, you can set that up however you want. Doesn't really matter. Go over to status. So my statuses, I have backlog, send. This is going to be a trigger. I have draft, sent, and paid. So by default, it automatically sets to backlog. I have a view invoice button. I will show you how to use that in a second. But basically what's going to happen is once our invoice and our payment links get automatically generated, we'll be able to select this button and it will open up our invoice directly in QuickBooks or whatever accounting software you use. Invoice date, straightforward, the day that we send the invoice. If you click into the settings and defaults, you can select the default date as today. Invoice number, this is using the auto number field. So I have it start 1, and I'm using a prefix with just INV for invoice with a dash. So it comes out with invoice -005. For the automation and the data that gets passed to our make scenario, which we will then end up using within QuickBooks, we need to convert it to a text field type. I have a formula set up here, and I'm just passing that invoice number or auto number field within the function text, and that will look after that for us. Amount, currency, pretty straightforward. I will just add $150. Description, this is just simply the description that we want to include within our QuickBooks invoice. I will just put in some random information. Link to customers. So this and this is connected. So this is where we select the customer that we want to send the invoice or that we are billing. I'll go in here and I will just select a new customer. And what we have set up here is a processing fee. So this is a formula field. And what I am doing is I want to take into account the fee that Stripe charges me, or something fairly close anyway, of 3%, and add that on top of our amount. So this is the processing fee amount, $4.50. Our total amount, or our amount, plus our processing fee gives us our total here. This is a record ID field. I'm just using the record ID function and just bringing that into the record as well. And then I have a Stripe payment link. This is a URL or a link field type. I have Stripe payment link ID, and this is just a text field type. You'll see how those are used shortly. I have a QBO customer ID. There's a few ways to set this up. I'm just using a formula. I'm just bringing in the link to the customers and bringing in the QBO customer ID from the customers table here. Because I selected this record here and there's no customer ID associated yet, it has not brought in an ID for us. That is fine. We will make sure that our make scenario accounts for that. You can see here it has brought in the billing email. Again, you could use a lookup. I'm just using a formula and using the text function again. And the last thing is the QBO invoice. This is a text field type, and we are going to write that QBO or QuickBooks ID back into this record once we generate it automatically. So that was just a really quick run through of this setup. It's very simple. Your situation and scenario is probably going to be a little bit more advanced or complicated, but this will get you started and headed in the right direction. Now that we've run through SmartSuite, we will dive into make.com. Again, if you do not have a Make account, you can go ahead and get one set up. There's a link in the description below to get started. I will open up my Make account. Once you get signed in, you just go in and click Create New Scenario. The first thing that we are going to do is create a mail hook. That is going to be our trigger, and I will show you how to get that set up back in SmartSuite as well. And we will also have to authenticate a few accounts, being SmartSuite, in this case, QuickBooks, and we also need to authenticate our Stripe account. I'll just click this, look up a webhook, and I'm going to select the custom mail hook. From here, I can click Create a Webhook, and we can rename it to whatever we want. Go ahead, click Save. You can click this Copy Address to Clipboard and hit OK. We can go back into SmartSuite, and what we want to do is click up here, go into Automations. And you can see I already have one set up here, but I will do it again. So if I go into Add Automation, we can name it to Create Invoice / Payment Link. We'll just do Make Webhook or something along those lines so that you know what it is accomplishing. What we want to do is when a record matches a condition, we want to select the invoice table, and we will go into status is equal to send. When we change the status of that record to send, it's going to look after the rest for us. Action is going to be send an email, and we want to send the email to that webhook or mail hook that we copied. That's the send to address. The subject, we are going to pass in the record ID, and then the message here doesn't really matter. And we can add the automation, and we'll just turn it. We have the automation set up here, and we can now navigate back to our make.com scenario. What's going to happen once we turn this on, and if we select this send option here, it's going to essentially call the mail hook that we just created, and it's going to pass the record ID to this module, which we can use in later modules. I'm going to build through this relatively quickly, but do not get intimidated. I do hope to add the blueprint, which you can use down here. What you will do is once I upload the blueprint, there will be a link in the description below for that as well. You can just click the import blueprint, and that will help get you started. There's going to be some modifications. You'll have to authenticate some things, and you'll have to make it work for your particular workflow, but at least it will be a very good starting point and show you how things are set up. The next step, what we want to do is from SmartSuite, you can search that, and we want to get a record. I already have the connection set up, but if you do not, you'll go ahead, click Add, and you'll basically add your sign-in details, and I think maybe your API key as well. From here, I'm going to choose my solution. I'm going to choose the table that I want to look up and get the record from, which is invoice. And I want to search by the record ID field that we created within the invoice table. The value we want to search by, we're passing that record ID to the subject line within our email. We'll click subject and OK. Now, when we run that in SmartSuite, it's going to send the record ID to the webhook. The webhook is going to pass that record ID back to this module, and we are going to get invoice record that's going to give us all of this data that we can use now throughout the next scenario, or that we can use throughout the other modules. Now we're going to add another module, and it's going to be get a record from SmartSuite, and we're actually going to look up the customer record this time. Go into here, SmartSuite, we will get a record, select your connection, go in to search invoicing, and this time the table that we want to get is customers. We are going to search by field, and it's going to be customer ID, and I'm going to use a function, so we can select this icon up here and select first, click within it, select this icon here, and from this second module, SmartSuite Get Record, we want to get the link to customers field. We can select OK, and we can move on to the next module. Now we can create a customer module using QuickBooks. We'll go and create a customer. You'll have to authenticate your account. You'll just, again, click add, and you can go through the process of logging in through QuickBooks. First thing we want to do is we are going to, from this previous module, we're going to pass the company name to the display name field. And we will also pass that, which we can just copy and paste down into the company name field. Next, in the email, we'll pass in the email field. And here we will come back to the billing address in a moment, because we're going to have to run this scenario to get the actual data that we need. Down here, there's your sales terms. You can select those, or you can add them back in SmartSuite and pass it through dynamically if your terms change depending on the customer. We'll hit OK, and we'll move on to the next module. I just pasted in the next two modules. These are both Stripe modules, and the first one is going to create the price, and the second one is going to link that price to the payment link and create the payment for us. Again, you're going to have to authenticate your Stripe account. I'm in test mode. What that's going to look like is going into your developers tab at the top here once you're logged into the account. Again, if you want to do this in live mode, you will just have to make sure that live mode is turned on. But I am doing this in test mode. We will go down to our API keys, and you'll click this reveal test key, and you're going to copy it. We want to make sure that it is the secret key. Then you'll go into this module, which is make an API call, and you'll add the authentication by selecting add and pasting the API key here. And again, you can rename the connection whatever you want. If you're testing it in your test mode, I would change this to my Stripe test connection or something along those lines. This is the very first module of this two Stripe modules. What that looks like is, again, it's make an API call. Then we're going to pass in this /v1/prices. It's going to be a post method. You want to pass in this content type and application/ww form URL encoded. All of this exactly as you see it. And then we'll go down to query string. Here, we're going to add the key as currency. The value is USD. Or if you want to do this dynamically, again, you can pass that value here in from your SmartSuite or your CRM account. If this is going to change, I have it as static text because I want all of my payment links to come up as USD. Then my next key is the unit amount. This is the amount that we're actually going to pass to Stripe. And what this is going to look like is account for your total, which we have set up here. This is the total amount that we're going to pass, but you actually want to multiply it by 100 as well, because that's the way that Stripe accepts currencies. Couple more items here. We just want to pass in one time, as this is not going to be a reoccurring subscription fee. The value can be blank. Then the next key is this product_data within square brackets name, and we're going to pass in this invoice number. In brackets, it says invoice number make. That's the field that we created with a formula based off of this invoice number, which is using a text function to convert that auto number or invoice number to text. And after that, we can select OK, go into this next one, which is again, a make an API call. You should already have things authenticated. Select your account, and we're going to have this /v1/payment_links. So now we're going to actually create the payment link. Again, a post request method, same thing here, content type, so on. And there's going to be 2 items here. The first one is going to be line items price, as you see here. And we're just going to pass in the body ID, which is the price link ID that comes from this module here. And again, I'm just going to statically pass in just the quantity of 1. Depending on your situation, depending on your needs, these may need to be dynamic values, but for this use case, everything is just going to remain static. Next module, another QuickBooks module. It's going to be create an invoice. What we want to do here is turn on this map, and we want to get the customer ID from this create a customer module we added. And down here, we'll add a line item. I'm just going to have 1 line item on my invoice for this scenario. If you have multiple line items, you are going to have to use some different modules like array aggregators or iterators. But for this purpose, it's just going to have 1 line. We want to pass in the amount that's coming from the very first module, pass in the description, the unit price. I'm just going to select any item that I already have within my system. And if we scroll down a little further here, I'm going to pass in the billing email address, which we brought in to our invoices record. This is the doc number. Again, that's the invoice number, and that's coming from this field here. And customer memo. This is important because this is where we are going to share the URL from our payment link. I have the text set up to say to pay by credit card. Click the following link, a 3% fee applies. We will not be able to pass in the right value yet, as it will be generated from here. I'm just going to backspace this out and leave it as is for the time being. And if we scroll down a little further here, we can see that everything else can be left blank. Select OK. Now we're going to create another SmartSuite module. We're going to update a record. And once it loads here, we're going to select our invoicing solution again. We're going to select our invoice table, and we want to bring in, selecting this map here, we want to bring in the original invoice record that we found. And if we scroll down a little further, there's a couple of other things. We want to update this status, invoice status to draft, and QuickBooks invoice ID here is where we create the invoice. We can pass in the invoice ID. 2 other things I do for reference, want to pass in the Stripe payment link and the Stripe payment link ID. But until we test those, we are not going to be able to get the correct values. I'll hit OK, and we can go on to the last step here. I'm just going to clone this, and I will go in this load, and I just want to switch this table to customers. Now that we've created the customer within QuickBooks, we are going to pass that QuickBooks customer ID back to SmartSuite. The record I want to find is the customer record. This one here, this is the module where we get the customer. That's number 3. See that it's flashing. I just want to use that ID. So what we're going to do is update that customer ID that we previously found. And we're just going to go down to this QBO customer ID and pass in right here, create a customer, pass in the ID that was created. Hit OK. Save this, and the first part of our scenario has been completed. We're at this point now where we can test each step within the module, and then we can pass in the last few values. The first thing that I'm going to do, I'm just going to run this module, and we can go over to our SmartSuite invoice, and we'll flip this to send. And if everything works correctly, we can come back into make, and we'll see that the ID was passed to the subject accordingly. What I like to do is I like to copy this ID, and then we're going to run through each step manually. We'll run this module only. We'll just paste in that ID, and now it has found the invoice record. Then we're going to run the get a customer ID record, pass in this data, and then we can select this create a customer and pass in the last few fields. I want to go down to this billing address, and I want to pass in the address. I want to pass in the city. We'll do the zip code. This country subdivision code is going to be the state, and we're going to pass in the country. And we can select OK. Once we have the QuickBooks Create a Customer module set up, I'm not going to worry about running it. I'm just going to move over to this Stripe Make an API call. This is the one where we're creating the price. So I'm just going to right click here, run this module, and just add any total I want. An invoice number, it doesn't really matter. I'll just click OK, and we can see that's run successfully. I'm going to click this output body, and I want to get this price ID here. I will copy that, move over to the Make an API call, which is creating the payment link, and we'll just paste in that price ID, select OK, and we can see that ran successfully as well. Now I'll move over to this last step for creating an invoice and select that. We'll open it up, and we will just scroll down to the customer memo. And what we want to do here is this last Stripe Make an API call. We'll just scroll down and pass in the URL. That is the payment link URL that we're going to include in the invoice. Select OK. I'll move over to this second last SmartSuite module, which we are updating the invoice. I just want to make sure that that is set up correctly, which it is. And I want to now pass in the Stripe payment link. Similar to what we just did in that last module, we will pass in the URL here, and the Stripe payment link ID, I will pass that in as well. We can use that for reference if anything happens to go wrong when we send out these invoices. And now the last one, the update a customer record back in SmartSuite, should be set up and good to go, which it is. So I can go down here, click save, and now we can just run once. We're going to test this entire workflow. I'm going to go back to our SmartSuite CRM here. I'm going to flip that to backlog, just wait for a second, and then move it back to send. And if everything works correctly, we can see all of these pop up as green. So we can see here, we had our first error. When we click this here, it's looking for product data, which we must not have included correctly. We'll click into it, and we will see here that this is still been whited out. And the reason for that is it's looking at module 3 when the data is actually coming from module 2, indicated by this number here. What we can do is just go into it. I'll just clear that value, and I will go into this second option here, and I just want to pass in the total and scroll down to the product data. This is where I am passing in the invoice number. In this case, I want to find that invoice number right there. And now we have the correct data being passed in. I can click save, and we can give this another test. It's going to throw another error if I test it right away, because it has already created the customer for us, and it will tell us that we cannot create duplicate customers. I'm going to quickly go in, delete that customer, and then I'll come back and get things testing again. Now that I deleted or made that customer inactive, I can come in here and we will run this one more time. Again, we'll flip this back to backlog, just wait a second and flip it back to send, and we can see what happens now. So we can see that's run successfully. And if we go back into our SmartSuite invoice table, we can see that it's passed in the QuickBooks ID for the invoice. If we go over to customers, we can see it's passed in the QuickBooks customer ID as well. So if we click this button here, it will open up the invoice within QuickBooks. With the invoice open, go up and copy the URL for the invoice, and we'll go back to SmartSuite. We'll just go into this edit formula for the buttons, and all that we're doing is we're just pasting in the URL found within QuickBooks, and we're just going to remove the number at the end. If I paste it in here, you're going to see that it has 167. That matches the invoice ID we passed back into our invoice record up to this equal symbol, and we're just going to concatenate and pass in the QBO invoice ID field to concatenate that entire string so that when we select the button, it will launch the URL for us. As you can see here, it's passed in the customer email, the billing address, the description, product or service, the rate, and so on. And over here, we can see that it says to pay by credit card, click following, 3% fee applies. If I click this preview, I can see what the invoice would look like. Here's the link included. And if I select it, it will open up this payment link here for us where we can accept the credit card, and it has included the processing fee. One last thing to take this a step further, what this is doing is it is creating the customer and the invoice for us. The assumption is that the customer does not already exist within QuickBooks, or that the QuickBooks ID for that customer does not exist within SmartSuite yet. A couple things that we're going to do is, first thing, we are going to right click and click add a router, and we're going to add another path. What we want to do is add a filter here. We'll select this filter and we can put customer not found, and really simple, we can change this to does not exist. And we are going to pass in the QBO customer ID. Back here, if this QuickBooks customer ID does not exist, then we are going to take this path that we just created. Now, if it does exist, we'll set up another filter. We have customer ID found, and we can flip this to if it exists. And again, we want to pass in the QBO customer ID. If it is found, then we do not want to create a customer. We do want to create the Stripe payment link and price. We want to create an invoice, and we want to update the invoice record back in SmartSuite. If I just hold Shift and select those 4 modules right there, and Command C or Control C for Windows users, and we can just bring it in here and attach it accordingly. The one thing we do want to do is the create an invoice. The customer ID that we want to pass in is actually the ID that is found within the invoice. If I go down here, I can select this QBO customer ID, and we've got that passed in. Make sure you save it. We're going to give this one other test. We'll click run once, and we'll go back to SmartSuite, and we're going to create another record. We'll just flip that to backlog, and we can add the information here. This time we'll add $500 and just put description. We're going to link it to that same customer, and everything else should be good to go. As you can see, this time it has found the customer ID already because we have created that customer in QuickBooks. If we flip this to send, wait here for a moment, and you will see this flip to draft for us. We click view invoice, and it will open up that invoice. And if I go over to the make scenario, we can see that it did take this other route just to create the payment link in the invoice, and it skipped creating the customer. As I mentioned, look in the description below. You'll have affiliate links to get started. Some of them do offer discounts if you end up buying a subscription to any of the softwares. Also, I'm going to try to include the scenario blueprint so that you can import it, and it will give you a good start to creating this scenario as it is a little bit more advanced. That is it for this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you hit that subscribe button for more tutorials in the future.